Hi, my name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm rector here at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in downtown Charleston, back for another edition of Rector's Corner. And I'm so very happy to have with me today our newly elected Senior Warden and Junior Warden of our vestry, Martie Adams and Lina Nandy. Thank you so very much for joining me. And we will be talking today about our recently completed parish listening process to help leadership discern how to better leverage our campus to meet our needs as a growing congregation. And in just a moment, I'll be asking our wardens to reflect a little bit upon the why of why we entered into this listening process. But before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of a background about how we got here. We have mentioned this in previous communications, but just to recap, a few years ago, vestry leadership commissioned a few different task forces us to look at how we were growing and how we could better reflect that growth. We had task forces on children, youth, and young family ministry, on mission, on communications, and a task force on growth that really ended up focusing in on our space constraints, how we can better leverage our worship space, how we can better leverage our campus to better accommodate the numbers that we are seeing. And our task force on children, youth, and young families was in regular conversation with our task force on growth. And that led to a couple of recommendations that we have acted on. The first was to call a full-time associate rector for children, youth, and young families. And we happily were able to call the Reverend Laura Rizak to fill that role. Laura is the first full-time second priest that St. Stephen's has ever had. She is the first full-time female priest that St. Stephen's has been able to pay for themselves. So a lot of milestones there. And I think Laura has just done a wonderful job since she began with us in the fall of 2020. During COVID, she just jumped in with both feet. The other recommendation that came out of some mutual discernment of the Children, Youth, and Young Families Task Force and the Growth Task Force was to fully renovate our classrooms for children and youth, both downstairs and upstairs. That upstairs space was really underutilized. It had just been used for storage. And we have now done that happily. We fully opened up those spaces thanks to the good work of parishioner Dick Moss's company and the professional expertise of our verger Mike Shewan, a wonderful input from Laura Rizak and other members of our staff. Those spaces now have been updated, have been opened up, and are ready now to better accommodate all of our growing numbers of children and youth. The upstairs space can also be used for some intergenerational events that Reverend Laura enjoys creating. And I think that has been a really good step forward. But the Growth Task Force, I think, also acknowledged that while we were looking at our space constraints and trying to address the needs of our growth with children and youth and young families, this was an opportunity to try to consider the needs of our whole congregation and to look at the entire campus. And there was some conversation about how we really have never had wonderful gathering space, fellowship space for the whole church. And that has begun to get us to where we find ourselves today, and this listening process that we have just completed. And so picking up there, I wonder, Martie, if you could begin to speak a little bit about the why of why we entered into this listening process at this time.
Well, precisely because of what you're saying, Adam, I mean, and I think an amazing thing that you didn't mention is that our parish has grown, our membership has grown during COVID, that people were watching what was being offered on YouTube, hearing your sermons and Laura's and Wayne's beautiful music, and then all the additional programming that you started during COVID with the Rector's Corner and the Bible study, all these things that you guys creatively figured out a way to do has brought us new members. So Amanda Rucker, our wonderful parish administrator, gave us numbers that we've gone from 259 active members, active people coming to church, to 414. So 415 active members, which means people that come to church regularly, people that are participating in our programming, not just people that are on the list as members, because that number is even bigger. But our pledges have increased from $263,000 to $566,000. We overshot our stewardship goal again this year. We've increased the staff. I'm so grateful to see so many children and families. We have 12 young people signing up for and taking Laura's confirmation classes. So for the first time since I've been at St. Stephen's, which I've been coming since 2003, there's a big group of teenagers, which I just think is fantastic. So we've seen all this growth. We've added staff. Used to just be one priest, and maybe, I don't know how long ago we started having a full-time admin, but now we have Adam, we have Reverend Laura, we have Deacon Greg, we have Reverend Courtney part-time, we have Amanda, we have Mike Schuin, who's a verger, unpaid, but who's there a lot. We have someone who plays the keyboard at the children's service. So our staff has increased, and there's no place to put everybody.
Absolutely, absolutely. Would you add anything to that, Lina, about the why of why we entered into this process?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with Martie. You know, the church has really flourished even during a really challenging period during COVID. And, you know, I think some of the challenges have been somewhat hidden in the sense that we haven't been meeting as often during COVID. But as things settle down and the more that we come back into the building, right now we're not doing a fellowship hour, but it's clear, even on this Zoom call, you know, Adam is calling in from where we used to have tea time. And there is some space available, but it's not accessible to all. It's not handicap accessible. And the way, for those who may not have been in St. Stephen's Hall, it's sort of broken up. It used to be an old home. And so it doesn't allow a whole lot of flow. So it's a challenge to think about, one, what's a good working arrangement so that our staff and our clergy can, you know, communicate with each other and talk with each other and really, you know, have these discussions that need to be happening. But also from the parishioner side, making sure that we have space to hold classes, have fellowship, and be inclusive and include those who might not be able to handle steps so easily.
Absolutely. I think the accessibility is a really important thing to keep in mind if we are to fully live into our mission to be a house of prayer for all people. This space that I'm sitting in by necessity now, because there's not enough office space to keep the office together, has eaten into the space we used to have for fellowship time. But even before I came in here, before COVID began, this space was not fully accessible to those who were handicapped or even had some significant mobility issues. And now that we've fully renovated our classroom space and have that wonderful new space upstairs, that space also is not accessible to those with mobility issues. And so that has led to a vision that has emerged over the last several months from our vestry leadership, from conversations with some key stakeholders that we have been putting forward for discernment in this listening process. I wonder, Martie, if you want to describe a little bit about the vision that vestry leadership has proposed for folks to respond and react to.
Well, I don't know where this great idea came from, but someone had the idea of renovating and hopefully expanding somewhat the admin space and having a second floor, and on the second floor having more office space so that you could be in the same building as the other staff. At Apple, they purposely designed spaces so that people have to bump into each other, because that's when the creativity happens, at the coffee bar or at the watering hole, as they say. So, and then in that downstairs space, it could be a great big open space, as opposed to what Lina referred to as the very cut up space of having one room next to another. And the idea then that we could have doors that open out into our beautiful garden. So having the gathering space where we could have tea time, perhaps between, or coffee hour, perhaps between the children's service and the adult service, so that those congregations could mix and then flow out into the garden, and having it be a central location that then would be accessible to all is just such a brilliant idea, I think. And then also in that new space, we could have a small lift or elevator that then could go across into the upstairs classrooms at the education building. So we really could manage everybody. And I have a friend whose granddaughter has spina bifida and is in a wheelchair, and she participates fully at her school because she can get around everywhere in her precious little wheelchair for a child. So I just think that it would be so wonderful to have space that really worked for everybody, old and young.
And Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the original intention of the building when it was constructed in the late 80s, I think 89, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that was the original intention of that hall. But at the time, we've experienced such growth. And so its original plan, as a fellowship hall, it made sense. We had one office that can accommodate one clergy member. And of course, here we are. Now we've got, Adam, Greg, Laura, Courtney. So we've got 4 clergy and the parish administrator. So adding another floor would really allow us to preserve that office space, not only preserve, but add office space to reflect that growth, but then to be able to use the space as it was once intended for a fellowship hall.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is correct, Lina, that turning what is now the office space behind the church back into a fellowship hall would be a return to the original purpose for which that space was intended when it was built in the late 1980s. And when you look back at how far St. Stephen's has come since the late 1980s, it really is incredible. The growth of this community has stretched over several decades now. And I would say, from the numbers that I've seen and the paperwork that I've looked at, that our active communicants list, our active participants, it's probably close to quadrupled since the late 1980s. And yet we're still on the same tight campus that we find ourselves on. And thank goodness, in the mid 1990s, the congregation did have the opportunity to acquire the property at 54 Society Street that doesn't just include the floors that my family and I live in, but where we've been able to have fellowship in the past, where my office is now, and the classroom space that we've been able to renovate. But we find ourselves now in a different time as we're celebrating our 200th anniversary, celebrating those saints of this parish who have gone before us and left us with such a legacy. And I do believe it's incumbent upon us in this moment to be thinking about what we want to hand off to future generations, and how we can continue to ensure that St. Stephen's can remain a house of prayer for all people with capacity to really live into that mission over the coming years. And I think that's where a project like this comes in. I also did want to mention that there have been some wonderings about the Memorial Garden, because obviously the Memorial Garden is close to the current office space and the work that we'd be doing here. I do want to acknowledge that and to say that the leadership of the church is absolutely committed, if we were to move forward with this, that the integrity of the memorial space would absolutely still remain, and we'd be looking at that. So we have no desire to disrupt anything in that space. I don't know, Martie, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I'll add that David and I have a plot in the memorial space, so I have a personal investment in keeping that beautiful. And also, other parishioners have expressed concerns about what might happen. So I'm just grateful that we have, an architect, and Michael Schuin has such a good eye and a vision and understanding of things. And we have Sheila Wertimer, who's an eminent landscape architect in our congregation. She has said she would be happy to advise us. So we will be sure that that space is beautiful for the Memorial Garden, and also for spilling out between the hopefully new parish hall into the garden. So I think it's just I really appreciate beautiful architecture and gardens, and I just am very excited about this. I think it will really enhance our campus terrifically.
Yeah, and we have begun to work on an initial basis with architect Glenn Keyes, who works in historic neighborhoods throughout our city, knows the Board of Architectural Review very well, and of course, any work that would be done that would be visible from the street would certainly need to be approved by the BAR, and Glenn would certainly be somebody who would help us to do that. But we have also begun to work, as I hope you all are aware at this point, with a consulting firm called Vandersall Collective to assist us as leaders in engaging the whole congregation in this process and figuring out next steps. And wonder, Martie, if you could say a little bit about Vandersall and the general arc of the listening process that we've just completed.
Well, I have been so impressed with Vandersall Collective. Mika and Aaron, the two principals, are so available, and I think have given us such wonderful guidance and leadership and advice. And we did consult with with another capital campaign advisor, and we just thought that Vandersall was a good fit for us, that they're faith-based. We start our meetings with prayer. They have helped us to think about the mission of the church and how whatever we envision will fit with our mission of being a house of prayer for all people. I'm sure the parish knows, because I have kind of nagged them to fill out the surveys, but we had 5 or 6 listening sessions at which one of them was in the church that I facilitated after one of our services, but the others were on Zoom. We had such good participation there, and at every one of these sessions, copious notes were taken. And then we also had the 8-question survey that went out, and we had more than 100 responses, which overshot our goal. And in those responses, both in the meetings, in person or Zoom, and in the surveys, strong opinions were expressed, which we think is wonderful, because it shows that people feel passionate about this church and our mission and our space. So the good news is that we can leave the analyzing and the compilation of all those surveys to the consultants. And then there will be more time, once they have analyzed and reported, for the parish to still give feedback. So the listening continues, and this really is a discernment process. If the majority of the congregation is saying, don't do this. We don't want to do this. We won't. It's the leadership is very excited, and we hope the rest of you all will be too. But it's been a very, very interesting process, and I feel very grateful for our consultants.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been wonderful how many people in our congregation have participated in the listening process, either through a listening session in person or on Zoom, or through the written survey. There's some who've done both of those. And so there's a lot of data, there's a lot of opinions that have been expressed, and we will look forward to getting a report from our consultants at our March vestry meeting, which will take place the middle of next month, that will sort of distill the comments and the observations into a coherent form for us. And then there will be an opportunity for us to share those results with the entire congregation. And as Martie said, to continue to react and to offer feedback. But we do want to let you all know that if you have questions, if you have wonderings, if you have things to add, concerns, please do reach out to either myself, any one of the other clergy, to Martie, to Lina, to any other member of our vestry, because we're here to listen. And again, we want this to be a congregational discernment process to discern whether this might be a good way forward, so that again we can have the capacity to meet our needs as a growing congregation. Is there anything else, Martie and Lina, that you have to add about next steps or what people might expect moving forward?
Well, this isn't exactly answering your question, Adam, but I do want to say that I'm so grateful for our sanctuary space, because St. Stephen's can accommodate so many of us so beautifully. And now that we've added the 9 o'clock service, you know, I think that the growth does not show up. I mean, we do see a lot of new faces, which I love, but it's not as if there's one service at which we're trying to put 4 people on each of the 3-person pews. So it's been interesting to me when I heard the numbers that Amanda gave us. I just thought, how can this be? But thank goodness the sanctuary, which can't really be expanded in any way, accommodates us so beautifully with the addition of services. So that's what else I wanted to say. And so, Lina, maybe you can answer Adam's question.
Oh gosh. You know, I would just say that I think I so appreciate that everyone has thought so creatively about how to accommodate our growth, from the clergy being willing to add services, from the vestry adding on live streaming and making resources available for that, from renovating the classroom space for our youth, but also for other considerations like the MICA project, being able to meet up there. So I feel like, you know, I feel like given our incredible growth, I feel like we've come up with really creative way to meet the challenges with or without the construction. But I think as we move forward, we're really kind of bumping up against the boundaries of creative options. And so I look forward to hearing the congregation's feedback about these plans, and I'm excited whatever the future holds.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Well, and Martie, I just would second what you said, that I think the beauty of our worship space is that it demands intimacy, and that, you know, if our active communicants got to 500 or 600, there would still really never be able to be any one service that would normally have more than 150 or maybe 160 at each service, because that's simply the sort of comfortable capacity space that we have. So that was why we made the decision to add a 9 o'clock service that is still in its infancy, but has been showing really wonderful promise, particularly since we were able to move back indoors. We began outdoors due to COVID constraints, but since we've moved indoors during the Advent season, that service has really built up thanks to Reverend Laura's leadership, seeing 25, 30, sometimes even 35 people, largely people who have young children, in addition to our 11 o'clock, as well as the early one that we have. So it can be deceptive, and in this time of COVID where we've had to go online more, you know, some of that growth can be deceptive. But I do feel like, thanks be to God, we are getting to a different place as far as all the safety protocols we've been following. And I do think there's a hope in the coming months over the course of this year that restrictions will be further loosened. And so the need for space on this campus, given the numbers we have, is only going to grow. And so that is another good rationale behind why we have felt the need to enter into this process at this time. But please do reach out to us with questions. Thank you, Martie and Lina, so much for making the time. I will be recording an interview over the next month, I believe, with Mika Vandersall and Aaron Weber Johnson, our consultants from the Vandersall Collective, to hear more about the nuts and bolts of this listening process. But,
Oh, good, yeah.
But in the meantime, please do reach out to any of us with wonderings or questions. We're always here to listen. And again, I will be back with another edition of Rector's Corner soon. Please, friends, stay safe and well. Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.